The sun was already high in the sky when the black Tesla pulled into the parking lot 3 blocks away from the downtown branch of National Trust Bank. The car's owner, a tall man in his late 30s with a neatly trimmed beard, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. Instead of his usual designer suit, he wore faded jeans, a plain navy t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers. He ran his hand over his face, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. This man wasn't just any bank customer. He was Anthony Wilson, the CEO of National Trust Financial Group, one of the fastest-growing banking institutions in the country. For the past month, Anthony had been troubled by reports landing on his desk, reports that didn't match the values he built his company on. Customer service issues at downtown branch, possible discrimination, minorities reporting unfair treatment. The words from the reports played in his mind as he walked toward the bank, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched to appear less commanding than his natural posture. 6 months ago, National Trust had acquired Regional Banking Corp., bringing 15 new branches under Anthony's leadership. The transition had been smooth on paper, all the right documents signed, systems integrated, training sessions completed. But something wasn't right at the downtown branch. Anthony had called an emergency meeting with his executive team last week. "I've received 17 complaints in the past month alone," he had told them, spreading the papers across the conference table. All from minority customers, all reporting similar experiences at the downtown location. His HR director had suggested more sensitivity training. The operations manager recommended a formal investigation, but Anthony knew something they didn't. Sometimes the only way to truly understand a problem was to experience it firsthand. "I'll handle this personally," he had said, closing the discussion. Now, as he approached the imposing glass doors of the bank, Anthony felt a mix of determination and unease. He'd built his career on treating people with dignity. The thought that his bank, his name, his reputation might be associated with discrimination made his stomach turn. The downtown branch was housed in an old stone building with modern glass additions. The interior was all polished marble and sleek counters, with the National Trust logo prominently displayed behind the teller windows. Anthony paused just inside, observing the scene before him. The branch was busy for a Monday morning. A line of customers snaked from the teller windows. Anthony took his place at the end, behind an elderly white woman with a small dog in her purse. He watched carefully as a young black woman with a baby stroller was directed to use the ATM outside instead of waiting in line. He noted how the branch manager warmly greeted certain customers while barely acknowledging others. This wasn't the bank Anthony had built. This wasn't what he stood for. He spent 40 minutes simply observing, making mental notes of everything he saw. The Asian businessman whose documents were scrutinized far longer than the white customer before him. The Hispanic couple who were told they needed appointments for services that others received on the spot. The subtle shifts in tone and body language from the staff as they interacted with different types of customers. Anthony's phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his assistant, "Board meeting at 2. Still attending." He typed a quick response, "Yes, might have more to discuss than expected." Finally, it was Anthony's turn in line. He approached the counter where a teller with a pinched expression and blonde hair, pulled back in a tight bun, looked at him with thinly veiled impatience. Her nameplate read L. Parker. "Good morning," Anthony said with a polite smile. "I'd like some information about opening a business account." The woman's eyes scanned him quickly, taking in his casual clothes and relaxed demeanor. Her lips tightened slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with the previous customer. "No, I just need some information to get started. I'm planning to open a small consulting firm," Anthony explained. "We prefer that potential business clients make appointments," she said, already reaching for a basic brochure. "You can call this number to schedule a time." Anthony glanced over at another teller who was currently walking a white customer through what appeared to be a detailed account opening process, no appointment necessary. "I see," Anthony said slowly. "And does that policy apply to everyone or just certain people?" The teller stiffened. "I don't know what you're implying, sir, but—" Anthony didn't get to hear the rest of her sentence. The branch manager, a thin man with graying temples and a permanent frown, was already striding toward them, clearly unhappy with the direction of the conversation. Little did they know, this ordinary Monday was about to become anything but ordinary for everyone at the downtown branch of National Trust Bank. The branch manager approached with quick, sharp steps that echoed across the marble floor. His name badge read T. Reynolds, and his face wore the practiced smile of someone who had mastered looking friendly while feeling anything but. Anthony stood his ground, maintaining a calm expression despite the tension building in the air. "Is there a problem here?" Reynolds asked, his voice carrying just enough volume for nearby customers to hear. He positioned himself slightly in front of the teller, creating a barrier between her and Anthony. "No problem at all," Anthony replied evenly. "I was just asking about opening a business account and wondering why I need an appointment when that gentleman over there is opening an account without one." He nodded toward the other teller station. Reynolds' smile tightened. "Well, sir, business accounts are more complex than personal ones. We set appointments to ensure we have the right specialist available." Anthony noticed an older white man walk in through the front doors. Reynolds immediately caught his eye, smiled broadly, and called out, "Mr. Thompson, coming in about that business loan? Come right over to my office." The double standard couldn't have been clearer if it had been written on the wall. "Interesting," Anthony said, keeping his voice level. "So some business clients need appointments and others don't." Reynolds' face hardened as he turned back to Anthony. "Look, sir, we're very busy today. If you'd like, I can give you my card, and you can call to schedule a proper consultation." Anthony glanced around the bank. He saw a young Hispanic woman being directed to use the ATM outside. He saw an elderly black man waiting patiently while newer arrivals were helped before him. He saw patterns that turned his stomach. "Actually," Anthony said, "I'd appreciate just getting some basic information today. I've been planning this business for months, and I'd like to get the ball rolling." Reynolds sighed dramatically. "Fine, wait here." He walked away, disappearing into a back office. The teller avoided eye contact with Anthony, busying herself with straightening already neat stacks of forms. Around them, the bank continued its normal operations, but Anthony noticed a few customers watching the interaction with interest. A woman wearing a hijab caught his eye and gave him a small nod of understanding. She'd been waiting longer than anyone else in the lobby. Reynolds returned with a pamphlet. The same generic brochure visible in the display rack near the entrance. He thrust it toward Anthony. "Here's our business banking information. The number to call is on the back." Anthony took the pamphlet but didn't move. "I was hoping for something more specific to my needs. Perhaps we could sit down for just a few minutes. I won't take much of your time." "Sir," Reynolds said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "we serve dozens of customers every day. We have procedures. We have policies. If you can't respect that, perhaps you should find another bank." Anthony looked directly into the manager's eyes. "Are these policies applied equally to everyone?" A flush crept up Reynolds' neck. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm directly asking if all your customers receive the same level of service, regardless of how they look." The teller gasped audibly. Reynolds' flush deepened to an angry red. "I think you should leave," Reynolds said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Anthony stayed rooted to the spot. "I'm a potential customer asking legitimate questions. Why should I leave?" Reynolds stepped closer, invading Anthony's personal space. "Because I said so. This is private property, and I have the right to refuse service." By now, several customers had stopped their transactions to watch. The tension in the air was palpable. A security guard near the door shifted uncomfortably, but made no move to intervene. "I understand this is private property," Anthony said calmly, "but I don't understand why you're treating me differently from other customers." Reynolds' control snapped. "You people always think you're being treated differently. Always looking for special treatment. I'm simply following bank policy." The lobby fell silent. Even the tellers stopped what they were doing. The words "you people" hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Anthony kept his composure, though his heart was pounding. "What exactly do you mean by you people?" Reynolds stepped even closer, his face just inches from Anthony's. His voice dropped to a venomous whisper that only Anthony could hear. "You know exactly what I mean. Now get out before I call the police." The security guard was moving toward them now, hand resting on his radio. Other customers looked on with expressions ranging from discomfort to outright distress. One young man had his phone out, recording the confrontation. Anthony knew he had a choice to make. He could walk away with the evidence he already had, or he could stand his ground and see just how far Reynolds would go. He took a deep breath, weighing his next words carefully. Whatever he decided would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone in the bank. Anthony stood his ground, aware that every eye in the bank was now fixed on him. The air felt thick with tension as Reynolds' face twisted with barely contained rage. "I'm a customer asking reasonable questions," Anthony said, keeping his voice steady. "There's no need for this to escalate." "You stopped being a customer the moment you started causing trouble," Reynolds snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. He turned to the security guard who had now reached them. "Walker, please escort this man out of the building." The guard, a heavy-set man with graying hair at his temples, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, is he actually causing a disturbance? He seems pretty calm to me." Reynolds' nostrils flared. "Aren't you questioning my authority? I said remove him." More phones were out now, recording the scene. Anthony noticed a woman in a business suit shaking her head in disapproval, though whether at him or Reynolds, he couldn't tell. "I have every right to be here," Anthony insisted. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't made threats. I simply asked why different customers receive different levels of service." "That's a lie," Reynolds shouted, his professional mask completely shattered. "You're trying to create a scene to make us look bad." Anthony remained calm. "The only person creating a scene right now is you, Mr. Reynolds." Something snapped in Reynolds' eyes. In a movement so quick it caught everyone by surprise, he raised his hand and slapped Anthony across the face with an open palm. The sound cracked through the lobby like a gunshot. People gasped. Someone shouted, "Hey!" A child started crying somewhere in the background. Anthony's cheek stung from the impact, but he didn't move. He didn't raise his hands. He simply stood there, looking directly at Reynolds, whose expression was transforming from rage to dawning horror at what he had just done. "Did you all see that?" A voice called out from the waiting area. "He hit him for no reason." "I got it on video," another customer shouted, holding up a phone. The security guard stepped between them. "Sir, that was completely uncalled for," he said to Reynolds, his voice hard with disapproval. Reynolds seemed to realize he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "He threatened me," Reynolds shouted, pointing at Anthony. "He threatened me and the staff. Walker, call the police right now and have him arrested for trespassing and making threats." "I didn't threaten anyone," Anthony said calmly, still holding Reynolds' gaze. "Everyone here witnessed our entire interaction." The teller behind the counter looked terrified, her eyes darting between Anthony and her boss. Another bank employee had her hand over her mouth in shock. The security guard hesitated, clearly torn. "Mr. Reynolds, I didn't hear any threats." "Are you calling me a liar?" Reynolds hissed. "Call the police now or you'll be looking for a new job tomorrow." Walker reluctantly reached for his radio. "Dispatching for police assistance at National Trust downtown branch," he said, his voice flat. Anthony didn't resist. He knew exactly how this would play out, and every moment of it was necessary. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly to Reynolds. "One you'll regret very soon." Reynolds smoothed down his tie, trying to regain his composure. "The mistake was yours, coming in here and trying to stir up trouble. People like you always want to make everything about race." An elderly woman in the waiting area stood up, her voice quavering with anger. "Young man, I've been banking here for 30 years, and I've never seen such disgraceful behavior from staff. Shame on you." She was looking directly at Reynolds. Others murmured in agreement. The atmosphere in the bank had shifted. What had started as an uncomfortable scene had become something else, a moment of collective witness to injustice that couldn't be denied or ignored. Walker approached Anthony. "Sir, I need to detain you until the police arrive. Please place your hands behind your back." "Is that really necessary?" Anthony asked. "I'm not resisting or trying to leave." "Standard procedure," Walker said, but he looked deeply uncomfortable. "I don't make the rules." As Walker produced a pair of plastic zip ties from his belt, Anthony complied, placing his hands behind his back. The cool plastic tightened around his wrists. "This is what happens when people don't respect authority," Reynolds announced loudly to the bank, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "We have zero tolerance for disruptive behavior." A woman near the door scoffed audibly. "The only person being disruptive is you," she said. "You hit him. We all saw it." Reynolds ignored her, turning to the staff behind the counters. "Back to work, everyone. The situation is under control." But no one moved. The tellers stood frozen, watching the scene unfold with expressions of disbelief and, in some cases, shame. Through the glass doors, Anthony could see a police car pulling up outside, its lights flashing. This was about to move to the next level. He took a deep breath, centering himself. Reynolds moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Anthony's ears. "You think you're so smart, but no one's going to believe you over me. I run this branch. I have an MBA from an Ivy League school. You're nothing." Anthony looked him directly in the eyes and smiled slightly. "We'll see about that very soon." The police officers were walking through the door now, hands resting casually on their belts as they assessed the situation. The moment of truth was approaching faster than even Anthony had anticipated. 2 police officers entered the bank, a tall woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun and a shorter man with a neatly trimmed beard. They surveyed the scene with practiced caution, taking in the zip-tied man, the flustered bank manager, and the crowd of customers who had stopped all business to watch. "What seems to be the problem here?" the female officer asked, her hand resting casually on her belt. Reynolds stepped forward immediately. "This man was causing a disturbance and threatening my staff. When asked to leave, he became belligerent. We've detained him under citizen's arrest until you arrived." The male officer turned to Anthony. "Sir, is this true?" Anthony shook his head. "No, officer. I came in asking about business banking services and questioned why I was being treated differently from other customers." Mr. Reynolds became angry and slapped me across the face. "There was no threat from me at any point." "He's lying," Reynolds snapped. "Actually, he's not," called out a middle-aged woman from the waiting area. She held up her phone. "I recorded the whole thing. The manager hit him for no reason." "So did I," added a young man near the door. "Got it all on video." The officers exchanged glances. The female officer nodded slightly to her partner, who moved toward Anthony while she approached Reynolds. "Sir, could I see your identification?" the male officer asked Anthony. "My wallet is in my back pocket," Anthony replied calmly. "But my hands are currently tied." The officer looked at the security guard. "You can remove those restraints." Walker seemed relieved as he quickly cut the zip ties. Anthony rubbed his wrists and reached for his wallet, pulling out his driver's license and another card behind it. The officer looked at the ID, then at the second card. His eyes widened. He looked up at Anthony, then back at the card, then at Anthony again. "Is there a problem, officer?" Reynolds called out, noticing the change in the policeman's demeanor. The officer ignored him, speaking quietly to Anthony instead. "Sir, are you really?" Anthony nodded. "Yes, I am." The officer straightened his posture instantly. "I'm very sorry about this misunderstanding, sir. Give me just a moment to speak with my partner." He walked over to the female officer and whispered something in her ear. She glanced sharply at Anthony, then at Reynolds. Her expression changed from professional neutrality to barely concealed shock. Reynolds watched this exchange with growing unease. "What's going on? Are you going to arrest him or not?" Neither officer answered him. Instead, the female officer approached Anthony directly. "Mr. Wilson, on behalf of the department, I sincerely apologize for this situation. We were given inaccurate information about what was happening here." A murmur ran through the crowd. People were looking at Anthony with new curiosity. "No apology necessary, officer," Anthony said. "You were just responding to a call. I appreciate your professionalism." Reynolds stepped forward, confusion and irritation babbling on his face. "What's happening? Do you know this man?" The male officer turned to him. "Sir, do you know who this is?" Reynolds glanced dismissively at Anthony. "Some troublemaker trying to cause problems for my bank." "Your bank?" Anthony finally allowed himself a small smile. "That's an interesting choice of words, Mr. Reynolds." The female officer cleared her throat. "Sir, this is Anthony Wilson." Reynolds shrugged. Am I supposed to know that name? A teller gasped suddenly from behind her counter. "Oh my God," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Anthony Wilson, the CEO of National Trust Financial Group. The color drained from Reynolds' face so quickly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Anthony straightened his casual t-shirt and looked around the lobby. Every eye was on him, some confused, others amused, and a few showing dawning horror as the implications became clear. "That's right," Anthony said, his voice carrying easily through the now silent bank. 3 months ago, National Trust Financial Group acquired Regional Banking Corp., including all 15 of its branches, including this one. Reynolds looked like he might faint. But the CEO wouldn't. "You don't look like—" "Like what, Mr. Reynolds?" Anthony asked quietly. "Like a CEO, or like someone who deserves to be treated with basic respect in a bank that I own?" The security guard, Walker, removed his hat. "Sir, I had no idea. I was just following orders." Anthony nodded to him. "I understand that, Mr. Walker." The customers were watching the scene unfold with expressions ranging from shock to satisfaction. The woman who had stood up for Anthony earlier was nodding with approval. The young man who had recorded the incident was typing frantically on his phone. "If I may," Anthony said to the officers, "I'd like to return to Mr. Reynolds' office to discuss this situation, and I'd appreciate it if someone could call my assistant. My phone is still in the property bag your security officer created." Walker hurried to retrieve Anthony's belongings. The female officer turned to the crowd. "Folks, thank you for your patience during this incident. Everything is under control now." As Anthony was handed his phone, he saw that it had been recording audio the entire time, exactly as he'd planned. He had every word of the encounter saved. He glanced at Reynolds, who stood frozen in place, his face a mask of dawning horror. The man who had smugly threatened him minutes ago now looked like he wanted to melt into the floor tiles. "Shall we go to your office?" Anthony asked him. "Or should I say my office?" Reynolds nodded numbly and turned toward the corridor that led to the private offices. As they walked, Anthony could feel every eye in the bank on his back. The weight of his position, both as the victim of discrimination and as the person with power to respond to it, settled fully on his shoulders. What had started as a fact-finding mission had turned into something much more significant. The evidence he had gathered today, in the most personal and painful way possible, would change everything, not just for this branch, but for his entire company. The walk to the branch manager's office felt like the longest 30 seconds of Reynolds' life. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor as he led the way, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Anthony followed calmly, nodding to staff members who stared with wide eyes and open mouths as they passed. The office was exactly what Anthony expected: leather chair, mahogany desk, framed certificates on the wall boasting of Reynolds' business degree and banking awards. A shelf displayed photos of Reynolds shaking hands with local politicians and business leaders. The room smelled of expensive cologne and furniture polish. Reynolds closed the door behind them, his hands trembling slightly. He gestured to a visitor's chair across from his desk, but remained standing himself, as if unsure of his place in his own office. "Mr. Wilson, his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Anthony sat down, his posture relaxed yet commanding. "Has there? I don't think so. In fact, I think things were perfectly clear. If I had known who you were—" "That's exactly the problem," Anthony cut in, his voice level but firm. "You shouldn't treat anyone the way you treated me today, regardless of who they are." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Mr. Reynolds, would you have slapped me if I had been wearing a suit? If I had introduced myself as the CEO from the beginning?" Reynolds swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "Of course not, sir. I would never." "Never hit someone you perceived as having power," Anthony finished for him. "Only those you think can't fight back." A knock on the door interrupted them. The teller with the tight bun peeked in, her face pale. "Mr. Reynolds, there's a situation in the lobby. People are posting about what happened on social media." A local news van just pulled up outside. Reynolds looked like he might be sick. "Tell them no comment. No one talks to the press." Anthony turned to the teller. "What's your name?" "Linda Parker, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Parker, please tell the staff I'll address everyone shortly. And if the press wants a statement, they can wait. This is an internal matter first." She nodded quickly and closed the door. Reynolds collapsed into his chair, loosening his tie as if it were choking him. "Mr. Wilson, please. I have a family, a mortgage, 20 years in banking." Anthony pulled out his phone and placed it on the desk between them. He pressed a button, and Reynolds' voice filled the room. "You people always think you're being treated differently. Always looking for special treatment." He stopped the recording. "This wasn't an isolated incident, was it, Mr. Reynolds?" Reynolds stared at the phone as if it were a snake about to strike. "We've received 17 formal complaints about this branch in the past month," Anthony continued. "All from minority customers, all describing similar experiences. I dismissed the first few as possible misunderstandings, but when the pattern became clear, I had to see for myself." "Those complaints are exaggerated," Reynolds protested weakly. "People are so sensitive these days." Anthony's expression hardened. "So sensitive that they imagine being slapped in the middle of a bank lobby? So sensitive they imagine being zip-tied and humiliated for asking simple questions." He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the bank floor. Staff huddled in small groups, whispering urgently. Customers continued to record with their phones. Through the glass doors, he could see the news van Anthony had mentioned, a reporter already setting up with the bank sign visible in the background. "Do you know why I started National Trust, Mr. Reynolds?" Reynolds shook his head mutely. "My father was a small business owner, a brilliant man who built a successful repair shop from nothing. But when he tried to get a loan to expand, he was denied. Not because of his credit or his business plan, but because of how he looked, how he spoke." Anthony turned back to face Reynolds. He was told, just like I was today, that he needed an appointment, that there were procedures, that he should try somewhere else. He walked back to the desk and sat down again. "I built National Trust on one principle above all others: equal respect for every customer who walks through our doors. It's not just a nice slogan for our website, it's the foundation of everything we do." Reynolds' phone began to ring. The caller ID showed Regional Director. He reached for it with a shaking hand, but Anthony gently placed his palm over the phone. "Before you answer that, you should know that I've already spoken with the board. This morning, before I came here, I scheduled an emergency video conference for noon. It's now," he checked his watch, 11:52. As if on cue, Reynolds' computer chimed with an incoming video call notification. The screen showed a waiting room with the names of the entire executive leadership team. Reynolds looked up, his face ashen. "You planned this whole thing." "I hoped I was wrong," Anthony corrected him. "I hoped the complaints were isolated incidents or misunderstandings. I wanted to be proven wrong today." He gestured to his still reddened cheek where Reynolds had slapped him. "Unfortunately, you proved me right instead." He reached over and accepted the video call. The screen filled with serious faces: the CFO, the COO, the regional directors, the head of HR. They fell silent when they saw Anthony sitting across from Reynolds. "Ladies and gentlemen," Anthony said calmly, "thank you for joining on such short notice. As you can see, I've completed my visit to the downtown branch, and I'm afraid we have a serious situation to address." The bank's COO leaned forward, her brow furrowed with concern. "Anthony, there are reports all over social media. Are you all right? We're seeing videos of you being detained." "I'm fine," Anthony assured her. "But our bank's reputation and values are not, and that's what we need to discuss right now." Reynolds stared at the screen, at the faces of his superiors, all looking back with expressions ranging from confusion to dismay. In that moment, he finally seemed to understand the true magnitude of what had happened and what was about to happen next. The faces on the screen stared in stunned silence as Anthony played the audio recording. Reynolds' voice filled the room, each hateful word hanging in the air like poison. When it finished, no one spoke for several seconds. "And that's not all," Anthony said, breaking the silence. He touched his cheek where a faint red mark was still visible. "Mr. Reynolds physically struck me in full view of the entire bank when I questioned why I was being treated differently from white customers. The head of HR, a stern-looking woman with silver-streaked hair, leaned toward her camera. "Mr. Reynolds, is this true?" Reynolds loosened his collar, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and panic. "It wasn't. I didn't know he was the CEO." There was a misunderstanding. "That's the point," Anthony interrupted quietly. "You didn't know who I was. You saw a black man in casual clothes and decided immediately that I didn't deserve respect or professional service." He turned to face the screen. "And based on the complaints we've reviewed, this wasn't an isolated incident." The chief operating officer shook her head in disbelief. "Anthony, I can't believe this happened to you." "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry for me," Anthony replied. "Be sorry for every customer who's walked through these doors and been treated this way without the power to do anything about it." He turned to Reynolds. "How many people have you humiliated who weren't in a position to fight back?" Reynolds stared at his desk, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Anthony stood up and walked to the office door. "Ms. Parker," he called, "could you come in here, please?" The teller entered nervously, her eyes darting between Anthony, Reynolds, and the executives on the screen. "Ms. Parker, I have one simple question," Anthony said gently. "Is what happened to me today common in this branch?" She hesitated, glancing at Reynolds, who was silently shaking his head at her. "You won't face any consequences for telling the truth," Anthony assured her. "In fact, the only wrong answer is a dishonest one." Linda Parker took a deep breath. "Yes, sir. It happens often." Her voice strengthened as she continued. "Mr. Reynolds has different rules for different people. Some customers get immediate help, others get sent away. We're told to prioritize certain clients and find reasons to delay others. And these priorities are based on," Anthony prompted. "How people look," she admitted. "How they dress. Their names, their accents." She looked directly at Reynolds now. "I've wanted to report it, but everyone who speaks up gets their hours cut or moved to the drive-through window." The regional director, a man with a neatly trimmed beard, spoke up. "Ms. Parker, would you be willing to provide a formal statement to HR about these practices?" "Yes, sir," she said, "and I think others would too, if they knew they were protected." "They will be," Anthony assured her. "Thank you for your honesty. Could you ask the rest of the staff to gather in the conference room in 5 minutes?" After she left, Anthony turned back to the screen. "I think we've heard enough." The CFO nodded grimly. "More than enough." Anthony looked at Reynolds, who sat slumped in his chair, defeated. "Mr. Reynolds, your employment with National Trust Financial Group is terminated, effective immediately. Please surrender your keys, ID badge, and any company property to security." Reynolds looked up, panic in his eyes. "You can't just fire me on the spot. I have rights." "Actually, I can," Anthony said calmly. "Your employment contract clearly states that physical violence against customers or staff is grounds for immediate termination without notice, not to mention the discrimination, which violates both our policies and federal law." "I'll sue," Reynolds threatened weakly. The company's legal counsel, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Mr. Reynolds, I would strongly advise against that. The evidence against you is overwhelming, including multiple witness statements, video recordings, and your own recorded words, not to mention the 17 formal complaints we've received." Reynolds deflated visibly. "Furthermore," Anthony continued, turning back to the executives on screen, "I am recommending the immediate termination of all staff members who have actively participated in discriminatory practices at this branch." "All of them?" the head of HR asked, looking concerned. "That would leave the branch severely understaffed. We'll manage," Anthony said firmly. "I'd rather close this branch temporarily than allow these practices to continue for even one more day." He walked to the window overlooking the bank floor. The staff were watching anxiously, clearly aware that their futures hung in the balance. "Not everyone will be terminated," Anthony clarified. "Based on customer complaints and staff interviews, we'll identify those who were following orders under duress versus those who were willing participants. Ms. Parker, for instance, has shown integrity today that suggests she was in the former category." The regional director nodded in agreement. "We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation." "Start today," Anthony instructed. "I want interviews with every staff member by the end of business, and I want to review all security footage from the past month." The COO spoke up. Anthony, the press is gathering outside. We need a statement. I'll handle it, Anthony assured her. But first, I need to address the staff. He ended the call and turned to Reynolds. Security will escort you to clear out your desk. Don't speak to the staff or customers on your way out. Reynolds stood shakily. 15 years I've worked for this bank. 15 years of perfect performance reviews. Perfect on paper, Anthony corrected. But banking isn't just about numbers, Mr. Reynolds. It's about people. And you failed the people who trusted you, both your customers and your staff. A knock at the door announced the arrival of the security guard, Walker. Mr. Wilson, the staff is gathered in the conference room as requested. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Anthony gestured to Reynolds. Please escort Mr. Reynolds to collect his personal belongings and then out of the building. As Reynolds was led away, Anthony straightened his casual t-shirt and took a deep breath. In just a few hours, his undercover mission had exposed a cancer within his organization, one he was now responsible for cutting out completely. The walk to the conference room felt like a pivotal moment. The staff stood as he entered, their faces a mixture of fear, curiosity, and, from some, relief. They knew changes were coming. They just didn't know yet how sweeping those changes would be. Anthony looked around the room, making eye contact with each person before he spoke. Good morning. My name is Anthony Wilson. I'm the CEO of National Trust Financial Group, and we need to talk about what happened here today, and what's been happening here for months. The room was completely silent as he continued. Some of you will be leaving this bank today. Others will help me rebuild it into what it always should have been, a place where every customer is treated with equal respect and dignity, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. He placed his hands on the conference table, leaning forward slightly. So let me be absolutely clear about one thing. What I experienced today will never happen to another customer in any branch of my bank. Not ever again. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the downtown branch. The bank's glass doors were covered with paper, and a sign read, "Temporarily closed for renovation, reopening soon with a new vision for banking." But the real renovation wasn't happening to the building. It was happening at the company's headquarters, where Anthony sat at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by his executive team and a group of community leaders. The training program is ready to launch, said the new head of HR, a woman who had been brought in specifically for her expertise in building inclusive workplaces. Every employee in all branches will complete it within the next month. Anthony nodded. And the new hiring initiative. The regional director slid a folder across the table. We've interviewed over 50 candidates for the downtown branch. Many of them are from the neighborhood itself, people who understand the community they'll be serving. Anthony opened the folder, scanning the profiles of potential new hires. The group represented a rainbow of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, exactly what he had hoped for. Good, he said. I want that branch to reflect the community it serves, not just in appearance but in understanding. A community organizer, an older woman with gray hair and bright eyes who had been fighting for fair banking practices for decades, spoke up. Mr. Wilson, these changes are impressive. But how will you ensure they stick? What happens when the spotlight fades and the press moves on to the next story? It was a fair question. The incident had made national news. Videos of Anthony being slapped and detained had gone viral, sparking outrage and renewing conversations about discrimination in banking. National Trust's stock had initially taken a hit, but had rebounded strongly after Anthony's public commitment to transformation. 2 ways, Anthony answered. First, through consistent accountability. He gestured to a young woman at the end of the table. Ms. Chen's team has developed what we're calling banking equality metrics, data points that will track how different customers are treated across all our branches. Wait times, loan approval rates, service quality surveys, all broken down by demographics to spot any patterns of inequality. He turned a page in the report before him. Second, through our new mystery shopper program. The COO took over. We've hired a diverse team of professional evaluators who will visit every branch regularly, presenting themselves as customers with various backgrounds, appearances, and financial needs. Their experiences will be documented and reviewed, with real consequences for branches that fail to provide equal service. The community organizer nodded slowly, cautiously satisfied. Anthony stood up and walked to the window. From the top floor of headquarters, he could see the downtown branch several blocks away. "What happened to me that day was humiliating," he said quietly. "But I walked in there knowing who I was, knowing I had the power to change things. Most people who face discrimination don't have that luxury." He turned back to the group. "That's why this isn't just about fixing one branch or firing a few bad employees. It's about changing our entire culture." 2 months later, Anthony stood before the renovated downtown branch. The physical changes were subtle: warmer lighting, more comfortable seating, art from local artists on the walls. But the most important changes were in the people. The new branch manager, a friendly man who had grown up in the neighborhood and worked his way up through another bank, stood beside Anthony as they cut the ribbon. Behind them, a diverse team of newly trained staff smiled for the cameras. "This branch will set the standard for what banking should be," Anthony told the gathered crowd. "A place where everyone, and I mean everyone, is treated with respect, dignity, and fairness." Among the crowd were many familiar faces: customers who had witnessed the incident, community leaders who had spoken out, even Linda Parker, the teller who had found the courage to tell the truth. She now worked at headquarters, helping to implement the new equality metrics system. As Anthony finished his speech and the doors opened, an elderly man approached him slowly, leaning on a cane. "My son was denied a business loan here 5 years ago," the man said. "Good credit, solid business plan. But they told him he wasn't a good fit. I always wondered what that really meant." Anthony nodded, understanding immediately. "He gave up on his restaurant idea after that," the old man continued. "Thought maybe he wasn't good enough after all." He looked up at Anthony with tears in his eyes. "I'm bringing him back here next week. Think he'll get a fair shot this time?" "I guarantee it," Anthony said, shaking the man's hand firmly. "And please, tell him to ask for me personally if he has any concerns." 6 months after the incident, Anthony sat in his office reviewing the latest data. The numbers told a story of transformation. Customer satisfaction at the downtown branch was the highest in the entire network. Loan applications from minority business owners had increased by 200%. Staff turnover had decreased across the board. His assistant knocked on the door. "The film crew is ready for you, sir." Anthony nodded and straightened his tie. The company had decided to turn his experience into a training video for all employees, not just at National Trust, but at any bank that wanted to license it. As he walked toward the conference room where the interview would take place, his phone buzzed with a news alert. National Trust Financial Group named Most Inclusive Bank in annual industry rankings. He smiled slightly but kept walking. Awards were nice, but they weren't the point. The real victory was in the thousands of customers who would never know what it felt like to be humiliated in a bank lobby, who would never have to wonder if they were denied service because of how they looked or where they came from. The cameraman gestured for Anthony to take a seat as he entered the room. "Ready when you are, Mr. Wilson." Anthony settled into the chair and looked directly into the camera. "My name is Anthony Wilson. I'm the CEO of National Trust Financial Group. And this is the story of the day I was slapped and arrested in my own bank and how it changed everything." Behind the scenes, banks across the country were already reaching out, asking to implement National Trust's new training programs and metric systems. What had started as one man's undercover mission had sparked an industry-wide conversation about who banking truly served and who it had failed. And in the downtown branch, every day, people walked through those doors and found something many had never experienced in a bank before: equal respect, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. It wasn't just good ethics, it was good business. The branch's numbers proved it. Sometimes transformation begins with a single moment of truth. For Anthony Wilson and National Trust Financial Group, that moment had come in the form of a slap that was heard across the nation, and a response that turned pain into progress, not just for one bank, but for an entire industry.